let us talk about sensory pathways. So there are three neurons that control the sensory pathways. They are first order, second order, and third order neurons. And let us first discuss the first order neurons. So these are dorsal root ganglions, and these dorsal root ganglions will carry the sensory information from the muscles or the skin, and then this signal is propagated via the dorsal root ganglion, which enters inside the spinal cord. So let us suppose that this is the first order neuron entering the dorsal column, and then it will ascend up. So the second order neuron receives the sensory input from the first order neuron, and the second principle is that it always crosses at the level of cell body of second order neuron. So as the first order neuron ascends, then we have our second order neuron which crosses to the opposite side. So let me draw another schematic diagram to represent this idea. So here this is the post central gyrus, which is the sensory cortex. Then I have the thalamus here. Then let us suppose this is the medulla, and below this level is the spinal cord. So let me divide it into two halves, right and left, and let us draw a better diagram of the spinal cord at this level. And as I have already said, the first order neuron relays the information via the first order neuron. Sensory information is first relayed by the first order neuron, then it ascends. So the degree of ascension depends upon the type of sensory pathway. So if it is a dorsal pathway, dorsal tract pathway, it will ascend up to the level of medulla. So this whole is a single neuron. But in the case of other pathway like spinothalamic tract, it will only ascend up to a few levels, and then it will meet second order neuron. So the second order neuron then crosses at this level, and then ascends up until it reaches the thalamus. So in thalamus there is the cell body of third order neuron, and it is the VPL nucleus of thalamus. So ultimately the third order neuron then relays the information into the postcentral gyrus. So similar is for this idea. Here the second order neuron is in the medulla, and then it will cross, because the second order neuron always crosses. So this is the principle to understand second order neurons, and then it will follow the same theory as that of the spinothalamic tract. Now let us discuss third order neurons. Order neuron is always in the VPL thalamus, and it never crosses, and it relays into the sensory cortex, which is the postcentral gyrus. Now let us discuss the first spinothalamic tract, which is the dorsal column tract. So it is called dorsal column because it lies dorsal to the level of spinal cord. So let us suppose this is the spinal section, and then we have our butterfly orientation of the spinal tracts. Sorry, spinal roots, and as I have already discussed, the dorsal root ganglion enters via the dorsal roots. So it is entering, and as I have already said, it will climb a few sections above the spinal cord, and in case of dorsal column tract, it will climb up to the level of medulla. So the primary order neuron climbs up to the level of medulla. Let me draw another diagram. So this is the postcentral gyrus, and let us suppose this is the thalamus. This is the same thing that I have discussed just before, and this is the medulla. So as I have already said, let us suppose this is the dorsal ganglion. It will enter the spinal cord. This is the first order neuron, and it will have to climb a few sections up the spinal cord. So for dorsal tract, so we are discussing dorsal tract, it enters, let us suppose this is the dorsal column. So it enters via the dorsal root, and it climbs up to the level of medulla. So for dorsal tract, I have said that it will end in the medulla, and then we have our second order neuron. So it will cross at the level of medulla, and this crossing is referred as internal arcuate fibers. So the second order neuron has fulfilled its promise that I have said, that the first principle is that the cell body will lie on the same side to that of the first order neuron. So let me divide this into right and left, and then it will cross. So it has crossed, and then it will again climb up to the level of thalamus. So the thalamus is the area in which cell body of third order neuron is present. So let us suppose this is the cell body of third order neuron, and it will always climb up to the postcentral gyrus. So let me make some things clear in this region. So let me make the spinal section more clear. So let us suppose this is our spinal section, and so let us divide the dorsal region into two portions. So this portion is fasciculus gracilis, and the lateral portion is the fasciculus cuneatus. So this portion that I have just hatched is the fasciculus cuneatus. So all the axons of running up the spinal section are referred as fascicles, and if it runs from fasciculus gracilis, then we should know that the first order neuron arises from the lower limbs, whereas those fascicles that arises from the cuneatus region arise from the upper limbs. Now another terminology that I want to discuss is there is a region in the medulla which is again divided based on the fascicles coming from the fasciculus gracilis and fasciculus cuneatus. So as I have already said, there are cell bodies, a lot of cell bodies which receives the first order neuron. So those cell bodies that receives the fascicles from cuneatus are known as nucleus cuneatus, and those cell bodies that receives the signal from first order neuron arising from the fasciculus gracilis is the nucleus gracilis. So now we are clear of that information. Let us move to the next terminology that I want to discuss. So as the second order neuron runs upward, so this tract now is referred as laminiskis. So this is popularly known as the medial laminiskis. So let me clear some of the things about dorsal column tract. So as I have already said, this will carry signals related to touch, vibration, and proprioception. And the first order neurons are 1A fibers, 1B fibers, 2 and A beta fibers. So it is very important to remember this fiber will carry information related to touch, vibration, and proprioception, and it will follow the pathway of dorsal column tract that I have already discussed. And now let us discuss the second tract, which is the anterolateral pathway. So for this I have to again make some differences with the dorsal column tract. So as I have said, dorsal tract is carried out by the fibers 1A, 1B, 2A2 and A beta, but anterolateral pathway is carried out by A delta and C fibers, and these will carry the information related to pain and temperature. So this pathway is also known as pain temperature tract. Okay, so let me draw another spinal cord section. So let me divide these portions. So we all know this is the postcentral gyrus, our sensory cortex, and then we have the thalamus, and here we have the medulla, and below medulla this entire region is the level of spinal cord. So as I have already said, our first order neuron will enter the spinal cord and will climb for a few sections. As we have already discussed, if it was dorsal tract, it would run up to the level of medulla, but it is not the same in case of anterolateral pathway. It will only climb a few sections within the spinal cord, and then it will be received by the second order neuron. So the second order neuron is also present in the spinal cord, any level of spinal cord. So it will climb only 2 to 3 spinal sections, and here it will be greeted by our cell body of the second order neuron. And we have already discussed the axon of the second order neuron always crosses at the same level of the cell body. So this crossing occurs in the region of ventral white commissure. So in this region it is crossing. So I will draw it in the next part. And after crossing, it always climbs, and as it climbs, it doesn't stop in the medulla. It will climb further until it reaches the thalamus, because as I have already said, the third order neurons are always present in the thalamus, in the ventroposterolateral nucleus of the thalamus. And from here, the third order neuron relays the information to the postcentral gyrus. So there are a few terminologies to understand this ascension of the first order neuron for 2 to 3 spinal sections. This tract is referred as Lissauer's tract, and it crosses at the level of ventral white commissure. So what is ventral white commissure? So let me draw a nice spinal section, and then we have our butterfly orientation. And so let me drag this drawing a little bit down, because I have to draw a few sections of work. So let us suppose this is the level of spinal cord, and as I have already discussed, our first order neuron will enter via the ventral root, and it will then ascend for a few levels up. So this is the Lissauer tract, the Lissauer's tract. and then it will meet another second order neuron. So this is the cell body of the second order neuron, and let me draw another spinal section here. So this second order neuron will cross at the same level. So this crossing is happening in this region. So this region forms the anterior white commissure. So this lies just beneath the spinal canal, and there is one pathology that we have to remember, that is the siding mammalia or sidings formation. There is the widening of the spinal canal, widening of spinal canal, and as that happens, it will damage the anterior commissure. That will result deficit in pain and temperature pathway. So before going to the question, I would like to revisit the concepts that we have studied. So let us draw a good spinal section for the last time, hopefully, and let us divide the different regions. So this is the post-central gyrus, this is the thalamus, this is the medulla, and the entirety below is spinal cord. And let us divide this diagram into right and left half. And as I have already discussed, the first order neuron travels a few sections up. So let us first draw the dorsal tract. So I have already said it will climb up to the level of medulla, and there it receives the second order neuron. Then it will deposit at the same level, and then it will travel up to the level of thalamus, where it visits our cell body of third order neuron, which is the ventroposterolateral nucleus, and then it will climb to the level of cortex. So this is a very simple diagram of the dorsal tract. But in the case of our spinothalamic tract, the anterolateral tract, it will climb only up to the few level of spinal cord, where it will receive the second order neuron, and then it will cross at the same level, and then it will climb up to the level of thalamus, and from where it will receive the third order neuron, and this will relay the information to the cortex. So this is a summary of both our tracts that we have studied, the dorsal tract and the spinothalamic tract. So this dorsal tract carries the information for proprioception, vibration, and whereas this spinothalamic tract carries the information for pain and temperature. So if we must know some principles to solve the questions. So if the sensation from the left side is being shown for deficit, then the lesion must be in the level of spinal cord. So for suppose let's suppose the proprioception and vibration of the left side is under deficit. So we suspect either the lesion is at this level, that is the spinal cord, or if the lesion is above the medulla on the opposite side, that is the contralateral side, or it is in the level of cortex in the contralateral side. So the first principle is, if the lesion is in the spinal cord, then the deficit and lesion is always ipsilateral to each other, whereas if it is in the medulla or cortex that is above the spinal cord, then the deficit and the lesion is always contralateral to each other. Whereas things are different if we consider deficit for pain and temperature, because we already know the second order neuron for pain and temperature pathway crosses in a few levels. So this is only 1 to 2 levels, and if there is a lesion in the level of spinal cord, the tract of the second order neuron is affected. So if there is injury in the spinal cord, the lesion and the deficit is always contralateral to each other in case of pain and temperature pathway, and in case of medulla or cortex, the defect and the lesion is again contralateral to each other. So this is for the dorsal tract, and this is for the pain and temperature tract. So if the lesion for the dorsal tract is ipsilateral, then the deficit will also be ipsilateral, and if the lesion is in the medulla or cortex, then the deficit for dorsal tract will always be contralateral. Whereas in case of pain and temperature, if the deficit is in the spinal cord, the lesion is always contralateral, whereas if the deficit is in the medulla or cortex, then the lesion is always contralateral to the deficit. So one thing is common here. So if the lesion is in the medulla or cortex, in both the cases, then the deficit is always contralateral. So above spinal cord, deficit and lesion are always contralateral. So now let us solve this question based on all the principles that we have just learned. So here we have 60-year-old woman who presents with numbness and tingling. So these are the symptoms that represent sensory deficit, and it is on the left side of the body, including her arms, trunks, and leg. On examination, she has left-sided loss of vibration and proprioception. So we know this is dorsal tract deficit, and it might be lesion in the spinal cord or above the spinal cord. So as we all know, if the lesion is in the spinal cord, then it must be ipsilateral, whereas above the spinal cord lesion must be contralateral. So from this point, the lesion, the deficit is in the left side. So the lesion might be in the left side of spinal cord. So this is what we can deduce from the first point. And the second point, the left side is loss of pain and temperature sensation. So here, this is spinothalamic tract defect or deficit, and the lesion can be either in the spinal cord or above the spinal cord. But here, in case of spinothalamic tract, we know that if the lesion is in the spinal cord, then the deficit must be contralateral to the lesion. But here, the deficit is in the same side of the lesion, so it is not possible. The lesion in the spinal cord is not possible. But above the spinal cord, the lesion and deficit are contralateral to each other. So if from this we can deduce that the lesion might be present in the right side above the spinal cord. So this is more promising because this is also being supported. That is, if the lesion is above the spinal cord, then the dorsal tract defect is also contralateral. So based on the clinical presentation, what is the most likely location? So left thalamus. So we know that it is above the level of spinal cord, and the deficit must be contralateral. So if the lesion is in the left side, then the deficit must be on the right side. But in the question, the deficit is on the left side, so this option is wrong. Then we have second option. We have left spinothalamic tract in the cervical spinal cord. So as we all know, spinal cord is already ruled out because of this principle that the pain and temperature loss is contralateral. So this is again ruled out. And then we have right medulla. So this is again above the level of spinal cord, and the lesion must be contralateral to the deficit. So here, the deficit should be in the left side. So it matches with our question. So this might be the possible answer. So for the option D, we know that the lesion is in the spinal cord, and for this region that we have just discussed before, the spinal cord is not a reasonable answer. So answer is right medulla.